Good afternoon to you all, and thank you for joining us here on Civic Space TV, specifically watching the Women's Show. Joining me on today's show is Miss Tricia, Gloria Nabaye, who is one of our resident hosts. Actually, all the hosts are here today, not because we failed to get guests, but yes, we are your guests today. Yes, so Tricia, thank you for joining us. Also, a happy birthday to her.
Thank you.
Yesterday was her birthday, and so we're still
Even
really...
Even tomorrow.
The entire month. But yes, but yes, we are celebrating Tricia's birthday. And also joining us is Miss Maria Alesi, all the way from Maracha. She crossed the River Nile 3 times to be with us today.
Yes.
And before we get into today's subject, I would like us to take a moment and share with the viewers some of the memories you have of the Right Honorable Jacob Oulanyah, who we will be burying this week. He was a speaker, he had his controversies, but today can we share those details that you will remember him for?
Yes, I think for me, I remember him most from his desire to want to improve the quality of debate in Parliament. I guess we cannot measure whether he was successful because, one, his term as speaker, he spent most of it out of office, but also as deputy speaker, I really don't remember how much effort, but completely understanding the context in which he works, right? So you can't solely say that he's responsible for the improved quality of debate or not, but just even the desire and the ability to voice this desire means that he also acknowledged what was lacking by the people who are representing the rest of the Ugandans. So for me, that's what I will remember about him, among other things.
Yes. Now, I think, and just
the memory has
yes,
run away.
The memory has run away. But when I think about Jacob Oulanyah, I think of the last sitting he chaired, and he was asking the parliamentarians to critically think about the Uganda they want, and then to have a debate on that. I think that was very critical for us, even as his tenure was beginning, that we shape the next 5 years of what the MPs or parliamentarians think of what the Uganda they want, and maybe perhaps, do legislation and debate around those critical issues that make Uganda a better place. That was the last time I saw him chair a meeting, but I was very interested in hearing how that debate would fall out or come out. And unfortunately, he's gone. But I hope it's a conversation we can still have, especially with the Parliament, the August House. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Mine is more or less related to Maria's. There's a point in my life when I worked heavily within the debate circles. And I remember as deputy speaker, we invited him to be guest of honor at one of the debate tournaments. And the first thing he said, even before saying I will come, was, "Can I debate?" And it was a high school debate tournament. And he was more excited about debating with the kids than he was about being the guest of honor. And then when he came, we told him, okay, because we used to do competitive debate, and he said, no, I think we should also try and mock Parliament. So we said, okay, we'll mock it. So when he said we would mock Parliament, we again assumed he would be speaker. Then he said, no, I want to be in the House. So he gave up his seat as speaker to a secondary school student. And then at one point his hand was up and he was sure they were going to pick him, and the student said, "Please sit down, sir." And he had this look of, how dare you? But yes, I do remember him for that. We do remember him for, I know we're talking about his love for culture and the fact that he always jumped up and broke into dance and song everywhere he went, but also his passion for children who are suffering from the nodding disease syndrome. And yes, we celebrate life. The Lord gives and he takes away. May the soul of the Right Honorable Speaker rest in eternal peace. Yes. So today on the show, we'll be talking about imagining a feminist internet. And again, it's an imagination because it probably doesn't exist. And since all of us on the panel identify as feminists, maybe the first place we should start this conversation on is the unfeminist character of the internet, Because again, because no one has thought to imagine a feminist internet, I don't think anyone has stopped to imagine how abusive the internet space can be, how violent the internet space can be. And so when we talk about having a feminist internet, it's not even to say, can it have colors of pink and can it be adorned with heels, you know, as the collage and 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 background picture, but it's to say, can it have certain minimum values that we uphold as feminists. But before we get in there, maybe let's paint, should I say, the problematic picture that causes us to have a conversation on why the internet should be more feminist.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And so would you like to go first?
And maybe I'll put it in a scenario of every other time I'm in a space, maybe a women's space, and there's a dirty joke on another woman, and I hear the tagline, I will not be part of the group that brings this woman down. It's something that I keep interrogating. Why do we even have to remind ourselves constantly that we actually perpetuate some of the things that are happening on internet? So if the gallery is playing to that, how do we then call ourselves in and say, I want to be part of that? So every other time I see that, I know there is something that is going off that should be checked. And that could be just, having, critical narratives or critical criticisms for women leaders, for even just a normal person. I mean, they'll put a lady there and they'll say, maybe a story will run, oh, her husband committed adultery, and all of a sudden the internet is off for the woman. Why did he commit adultery? Why are you not doing yours? I'm like, which roles? So that narrative that every other time we need to keep ourselves in check is something that keeps me awake to the fact that the internet can be something that, us as feminists need to constantly, and we don't need to police it, but constantly, check and reimagine for ourselves, what should it be like? These stories, these narratives shouldn't be pushed online because they're just a reflection of what we are going to experience as overflow into our everyday lives. So that is where I stand right now in problematic.
Thank you very much, Tricia.
I don't know that answer your question or say something about Tricia's, but let me say something.
Maybe start with saying something about Tricia's and then
I think that I think that there is a need to police the internet, but not to police it in such a way as to silence voices of people who are highlighting critical issues around violence, around the cost of internet. Even something as simple as we have a current practice in Uganda where as soon as I speak about somebody that's considered important or the fountain of honor of Uganda, there's the concept of disturbing the peace of, right?
Yeah.
Or how quickly we threw around issues of defamation and things like that, simply because I called someone out on their bad manners, right? But there is need to police the internet. Back to the question of a feminist internet and how we've gotten here. I think the fact that the internet is born of a structure of a society in which we exist, a violent, very patriarchal, deeply racist, imperialist society that focuses on erasure of people that we consider not human enough or people pushed to the margins of development. So in this case, we're looking at women, we're looking at members of sexual minority communities, gender minority communities, ethnic minorities. We're looking at political opposition groups, and also we're looking at Africans' race in terms of the exclusion of the content of Africans, the exclusion of the narratives built and pushed by Africans, right? Because when you Google the first things on the internet, I can guarantee you, even when you go onto platforms like YouTube and other social media spaces, by the time you arrive at content by Black people or other minority races, right? You have to put in, like every time I'm on YouTube, I have to add Black woman to whatever I'm searching to arrive at it. So this exclusionary practice, which exists in the world as we know it, I think we all here have traveled, and you know the trauma of being at an airport and being Black. Like all of a sudden there is a target on your back. You can't sneeze, an unacceptable sneeze. So that same that same practice, those same forms of violence are carried onto have been carried and are part of the very fabric that makes the internet. Because again, who owns these platforms, right? It's predominantly white male people in the global north. We have a piece of it. Sometimes people are like, oh no, the internet and I think online-based things provided an opportunity for EcoStart, and half of the time I'm laughing. I'm like, what is EcoStart, right? Access to economic resources. That the internet in itself is, again, a reflection of the inequality within access to resources. Because for you to be on the internet, you have to have some form of electricity. You have to have a device that actually allows you to access the internet, which is a thing that which is something that's not accessible for people in middle and low income communities. And that's not just only Africans, but also we have people of this nature in South Asia, in South America, and those different societies. Also, the fact that the extrapolation of these violences from the physical world into the online world is what has birthed the discussion and the need for us to actually interrogate the internet and give it a feminist lens, so that we come out with everybody accessing it equally, but also accessing it safely. Yes.
Okay. And maybe you have taken us into the actual conversation on what a feminist internet looks like, and you've started the conversation right there at access, and bringing access down to our country, to country context, to regional context. What would access look like? I don't even know how to ask this question, but within the context of Uganda, okay? Because with access comes affordability, you know? With access comes infrastructure. I remember when we were having a conversation on digital rights with Sandra Rresearch, and we're talking about remember there's a time they were digging up the entire Kampala and said they were putting fiber for us to get, I don't know where the fiber stopped, or if people, but Kampala stole the fiber. But what does access look like for the average Ugandan if we're going to be talking about a feminist internet? And I know that when we talk about access, there's the assumption that we have access, we who are on the panel, but we also have our own unique inaccessible issues. Some of us live in swamps. But anyway, what does access look like?
It was a swamp.
And that's what there is no network. Yes. So when you leave work, you can't work at night. Yes, but
and I love the tagline, Bana Kampala, because there is also now that disparity of to whom is this access? Are we talking about? Are we talking about the swamp people, the Nakampala people who most probably will even have channels that are free, and then we have, you know, the other people that are in the outcasts of Kampala that most probably are even not aware of how they can access this internet. But also critical on that is then we need to start to look at internet as a basic service as well. Why is it that we have fiber dug and it's something that is still inaccessible too? But it speaks to all the other, you know, basic services that we want to require as Ugandans. We cannot tie it away from that. So we are speaking of the fact that there is now e-commerce, the fact that post-pandemic there is e-health services that you can get. And this is not just for the people within the urban settings, but if we could actually have it as a basic, you know, service, even for people in the outcasts, it saves you a trip to look for your smallest kafunda or your smallest thing. If a doctor knows what you need and then they send it maybe by the bike after getting like a text or anything. And it also goes back to how we are like envisioning access for students. For you, and I don't want to say me as me, because when I sit at Gliss, someone is paying my internet in that moment. I may not afford it after I leave.
When you go back to your swamp,
because I'm imagining that company would buy me dinner. So those questions of to what extent can we have it as a free service and a basic service, so that accessibility is not something that is almost like a luxury. To own a smartphone is beyond a wild dream. I mean, I remember as the phones kept changing, you kept imagining they're leaving me behind,
Yes.
and at some point you actually realize access to information has now been tied to internet.
Yes.
And to owning a device and to being able to access these devices. So a basic service in itself would be ideal. How we are going to achieve it as Uganda is blurry for me, because we still have other basic services we need. We need hospitals, we need education. So even before we make it a priority, there are all these other things that are dragging along with it.
And maybe, Maria, before you come in, she just reminded me when she talked about access and basic social services, and maybe just taking this a little bit to the region, but very much relevant to Uganda. I was in the neighborhood, in Nairobi, and I decided to go and shop. So when I was leaving my hotel, I could order a cab. Then I reached the shopping mall.
And you had no internet.
And let me tell you, I was disturbed. And then I kept saying, so what am I going to do? I had gone to the other side in my adventurous, nature.
Yes.
I gone the other side. I looked around there, and so I had to go back to one of the shops I had been at, and then ask to be tethered. And then after being tethered, I got a cab, but now they hustle to run from the shop
the cab
to the to outside,
Yes.
And so when you talk about access, I'd like you to talk about access and how access hinders the enjoyment of key basic social services. And by the way, my cab was a luxury. But how would access hinder the enjoyment of key basic services?
So I think Tricia has provided the very foundation of when we think about access to internet and when we think about a feminist internet, is just starting by thinking about it as a basic need, right? Thinking about it the way we think about education, thinking about it the way we think about healthcare, thinking about it the way we think about transport or water, because of the way the world is evolving as well. If 15 years ago, internet was really a luxury for many of us, and we existed completely okay, not knowing about the internet. If you went to a school that had a computer laboratory, maybe had like 10 to 15 computers in a school of 200 people. So do you see how much of
teacher
a
had
thing?
a key.
Yes, how much of a thing it was never for us, right? But now, like you've said, post-pandemic, and one of the interesting things that happened in 2020, 2021 for Uganda is that 1.5 million users, 1.5 million people came to using the internet. So you see that jump within a period of 1 year. So that also shows us that, and that of course must have been supported by the fact that, it was sponsored by the lockdown, right? The fact that we couldn't physically go to do a lot of things. We are seeing more and more governments and other policy makers thinking more about a cashless economy. Now, for us to be able to do complete access, it's not just about thinking, it's not just about getting people on smartphones. It's thinking about internet as an enabler in relation to other enabling infrastructure. So we're looking at access to electricity. It might not be generated electricity. It's all the alternative possibilities of how someone can access electricity. So if we're looking at solar, bioenergy, whatever it is that you're thinking about as a sustainable alternative. We're also looking at access to education. It's so easy to think that when you get a phone, many of us are still like the guides of our parents when they're using their smartphones and using the internet. Not even because they're not educated, but the information is a lot when you're dealing with these things, right? So access to education, how do we incorporate, one, the learning about using internet into the education system, but also making sure everybody accesses education, because we can't say it's part of education while other people are not part of learning about how to use the internet because they don't have access to school. The other interesting thing is language. That it's easy because you speak English, understand Luganda, and maybe have a third language, Ateso or Oluganda, Olubara, to think that it's easier to navigate life. But how if we're going to move into, I like, usually people have the conversation about the fourth industrial revolution. Half of the time I'm laughing because I'm thinking, look at the demography we're working with. We're having the same conversations on the fourth industrial revolution with countries like Singapore, with countries like Iceland. Like, what are we talking about, given the kind of like the structure of our population, many of whom who do not finish primary school, many of whom do not have English as their first language, but everything is happening in English. Of course, there is the discussion of investment. You've talked about how we're going to make it possible. It's very simple. I would like to tell people, like, we complicate a lot of things. If you had money, like all of us, when we have money, we know what is the most important thing to us. So we allocate that money. I'm just going to use an example from our Facebook group I'm on, where someone posted and said, guys, I'm stressed between paying the landlord and paying tithes. I don't know what to do.
Really?
Maybe my question was, if you don't pay rent, how is the landlord going to pay their tithes? But yes. So, but when you know what's important to you, when you start thinking about when you start thinking about internet as a basic need for improving the lives of all your citizens, then you will invest in it, right? So what are our priorities as a nation? What are the priorities of our representatives in parliament? Right now, there's I'm going to use this example, and this is really just using a clever example to fit something. There's a debate around the 101 children that Jacob Bolanya was sponsoring. That speaks to the way we think about education, that we've moved education away from the matter of a basic need and a structure and system conversation to individual goodwill. Individual goodwill is not sustainable. It's dependent on the goodness of my heart, how deeply I think about your problem, right? And it can change anytime. But also, politicians being politicians, like, goodwill is not. It's quid pro quo, something for something, right?
But with what is on earth, they actually die. And then there is a real problem that is left behind.
As opposed to if the structure existed well and we didn't have to be there, we didn't have to rely on individual goodwill for people to access education. Yes, then we would not have this problem. We would now be thinking about the fact that, someone who was contributing to our wedding meetings has died, as opposed to a basic need. So when we start looking at internet as a fundamental human right, which it actually is right now, then we will invest in it. The digging up of the roads, right? That is going to happen. Maybe in the next 10 to 15 years, there'll be something new that will require us to rethink our infrastructure. That must be something that happens. But at the core is the principle that when we think about it as people's livelihood, people's lives, matters of life and death depend on access to internet in many places, then we will invest in it from that perspective.
Okay. Thank you very much, Maria. And you raise a couple of important aspects. But maybe one of the things that I'd like us to extend on, especially since we're talking about social services, and access and priority, is to again linking it to the feminist principle on inclusion, on dignity, but then also looking at reducing the inequality gap. What are some of the realities that we should be ready for, especially when you talk about the Industrial Revolution? What are the realities that we should be ready for in about 4 years, actually 10 years to come, if we're not closing this technological inequality gap at global level, but also at national level? Because at national level there is the divide between the people at the periphery and then people who have the minimum but expensive access to the internet. Yes.
Okay.
It was a continuation to.
Okay. Yes. So 2 things. Inequality that comes from lack of access to internet, really a lot looks like the inequality that exists, because the people who are going to be left out are the ones who are already being left out, even without even without internet being the primary way in which we access services, or access services, goods and services. Now, what's going to happen again? The way people who do not have access to quality education cannot access high quality jobs or employment or income generating opportunities is the same way people who do not have access to education will struggle with accessing the internet. Because it's one thing to just go on Google and see and say, who is Isabella Akiteng? And it's another thing to be able to have the analytical skills to know that this is accurate information, this is disinformation, this information is coming from this source, like the small things that make it possible for you to verify the content on the internet. Because once the internet becomes open, like any other space, anybody is going to get onto it. We've seen it today, like, right? That there's always some fake news going around. I remember, I think 4 or 5 days ago, someone sent an article about a cabinet reshuffle, and I'm like, guys, aren't we tired? Don't we have a new what's the word? In Uganda, it's kakodyo. Don't we have like a new thing, a new way we can, like a new trick we can use for these things, right? So the inequality will look the same, but of course, again, in the suffering of this is women. Yes, women, both women in urban areas, yes, but mostly women in rural communities, because the vast majority of Ugandans actually live in rural areas as opposed to what we think. Like Kampala, maybe by day now has a population of 6 million people. That's like 10%. Yes, that's by day. So the rest of us go to zero at the end of the day. It's also important to understand that persons with disabilities are going to struggle on the internet. And because our current idea or thought of disability is you can't walk well, or you have like a physical impairment. It's how are we creating internet for persons with hearing impairments, with what are they called? Cognitive, cognitive impairments. How are we creating internet for that? Because then those who are going to be left out. And it's not just about, sometimes we think internet is just about reading news. It's about accessing ATMs. It's about even accessing education. Today there was a big contention around the time of the pandemic with online learning and things like that. What did it mean for people in Nabila to be able to attend classes in Makerere? So we're also looking at sexual and gender minorities, because these groups do not come onto the internet because of the violence that's located there. So if we do not create a safe and inclusive caters for safety, that people who come onto the internet must not experience violence while they are on the internet, right? It's also a discussion around safety for children, because sometimes we think, of course, there's a whole other debate about pornography and what that debate and the moral stance and the things that it takes, but we must discuss the issues of pedophiles existing on the internet and what it means for children, especially girls, and what that means for the violence they experience and internalize at that point and learn to live with, and yet that's not what they're supposed to be living with. So aside from that, there are also people living in poverty as a general collective, both in the urban areas and in the rural areas, that these people will also still be excluded. So what exclusion looks like right now from all the spaces we can think about, because again, the use of internet is still a very elite concept. So much so that if you look at the way people speak of and engage with social media, it's like, if you're on Twitter, you're dope, cool people in Kampala, and if you're on Facebook, you're the riffraff of society, the people, like the places where conversations don't happen. And in that way, our classist nature comes to life in that debate. And so, yes, you can leave these platforms for your own safety, for your mental health and different things, but we must also understand that sometimes within that lies our inherent classist nature. So the inequalities that exist today in the world without internet would be moved into internet as a platform or as a service.
Okay, and maybe to continue, let's talk protection, and let's also talk our individual agency to decide what gets onto the internet about us and how we are protected on those spaces. and one of the stories that comes to mind is, remember the university student who had a suitcase that he became Suvi, yes, and he became an overnight sensation because the internet was laughing at, people were laughing at him. He did not choose to be put there. And yet, even if he did not choose, he didn't have the opportunity to say, "Get me off."
Like when it's there, it's there. People.
Yes, it's there, it's there, and there was no mechanism to protect him. He was a very unwilling victim in that regard, and we could have so many other stories about that. How do we make these spaces more protective of unwilling victims, but also of children, but also of clusters of people that society has, that the bigger bulk of society has chosen to demonize? You know, so in talking about feminist principle, we're looking at dignity. We're looking at agency. That, can you just allow me to live my life in my privacy without dragging me onto the internet? Can we talk protection, especially within the context of Uganda, which is where we feel like we are the social media in-laws, we are the social media church, we're the social media police.
Monitors.
Yes. How do we strengthen protection for us all?
Thank you. Maybe to actually add on to what Maria was saying, the need for digital literacy, and not just how to navigate that space, but what this internet really is. Because when the pandemic showed up and school was pushed online, and that is even just for a small group of people, a lot of parents were worried for the information that their children were privy to, that they couldn't censor and they couldn't filter. But lo and behold, I remember my auntie was supervising one of the classes that were happening on Zoom, and there was a child that was using 4 language. And for a reason, the teacher was conflicted on what to do with them, so they kept taking them back in the waiting room. But there was a gallery of children that were privy to whatever she was saying, whom for a lack of a better thing, most probably will copy, or be appalled or even offended in the things that are happening. But that was just a small case in point. So imagining all the other information that they are privy to, that without you censoring it, there is a lot of flowing, and not every parent knows how to put a child restriction or a child mode. And also those are the few that can be able to do it also struggle with it. And also then regulation. A lot of the regulation around cyberspaces and digital rights and the internet that was formulated within Uganda, even in the Great Lakes region, when you read through it, it's for particular individuals and for a cause of, we are going to police it to a point where we make sense of it. So the internet showed up, and the laws that came out, then we have offensive communication, but for who? I mean, if I was offended in a WhatsApp group, if I know my rights, perhaps, but then also they will ask you. I mean, there is a right to offend. So what then do you do? So there is a lot of legislation that is fluid, that cannot help us, navigate these spaces with a little bit of privacy protection, and a semblance of my rights are being protected. Speaking of Suvi, and I love that it turned for the better, but I'm pretty sure most probably he wasn't the one to want to participate in such a thing. I mean, he was a new student at university. It set a precedent that if it hadn't gone otherwise, he was going to be bullied into the 4 years he was at the university. And that the fallacy that what is online stays online then becomes very real, because now let me say, like, for key populations, if a photo went out and then the violence starts online, it's very, very, very real that it will definitely be put offline. So that kind of security and protection is something we didn't envision as we set out as a country. I want to imagine all of us went on a wave. I also didn't know a lot of what my digital rights and digital security looks like until you come to a point where you need this consciousness to know, actually, my data is out there. How do I erase it? How do I protect myself? from my data being used, the algorithms of making sure that the information that I'm receiving is actually selected out because of the internet searches that I am doing. And this is knowledge I know now. But I know a lot of people, even within the rural area, in the urban areas, that most probably don't know.
They just be shocked. Hey, I was just talking about.
Can you imagine?
Shoes.
Yes, and they came. Do you know that the thing brought all the things that I wanted to see? The news on Uganda is a first, but I know for a fact, because I'm looking around fellowships, there is an algorithm that is happening, and this is just knowledge I know that will bring around fellowships that I'm looking around, or any other information that I may need. So those are the key. What is our data going to be used for in the future? Our privacy. If I'm online, am I really online or offline? Am I really offline? Did I sign out? Do I know what siphoning is? And these are legal terms that like very hard terms we use, but important, because I've seen a lot of people share those. Then you have to put scam alert, because you know, we keep wanting to win things. I don't know where we got the advent of win an iPhone.
Poor.
We want to win. I think it's easy.
I think it's easy
And I used
to
to
move
click
from
those
Android to
iPhone.
Mac.
So you know, it's continuous, and like you said, the kakodio of, you know, cabinetry shuffle. It's continuous.
English word enough.
It is good like that. It makes sense like that. So it's continuous. It's with us. I mean, you see someone sending a video that happened in Congo, and then it looks like it's happening. So that's misinformation. Everyone is like, that road, please don't pass that road, only to find out the road is not even in Uganda, where they are stealing things from people's cars, but it's online and it's being shared. So that kind of security of, you know, scrutinize, it's individual mostly. Scrutinize the information. What's your privacy like? Perhaps we will never understand what befell him. But I'm glad it was a narrative that changed for the better, that there was you know, an effect of it that became good. I don't know if we asked Subi today if it was a blessing in disguise for him. Myself, I would be offended that I made news for both good and bad. I would take the good, of course, but it's a continuous conversation. Yes. It's a continuous conversation on privacy, on digital literacy, on regulation, on safety, that is both individual but also a thing that state should be able to look into.
Yes.
And yes, please.
Yes, I was going to just add on to making it like a structured debate. Like there's a lot we can do as individuals, right? What kind of apps I download, what sites I go onto, what information I put where, and things like that. But the other critical thing to look at is, again, to remember that the internet is a product of neoliberal capitalism. And because it's a product of neoliberal capitalism, there is an important phrase I saw from I think the Twitter hand of Unwanted Witness, where they said, if it's free, you're the product. So understanding that our information is for sale, right? It's small things as online, what are they called? Ride-hailing apps. So we're looking at the equivalents of SafeBorder, Uber, and things like that. What are these people trading in? Because when you do the math, when you do the economics, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up, right? So what are people trading in? Which makes also, because you see, neoliberal capitalism also renders our states quite weak. That even if Uganda is going to regulate, and I take regulation with a pinch of salt, given our current governance situation, because in the spirit of regulation, we have seen more and more that the state is curtailing our use, our freedoms on the internet, as opposed to actual regulation. Because if you take in point how we've complained about MTN for the longest time, there is not a lot UCC has done, but UCC will quickly jump at because I came onto a social media platform and said something, now I'm going to regulate you. Because bloggers are the ones who've been sharing certain critical information that mainstream media houses are not able to. We are now going to regulate online bloggers, right? So I take regulation very, like, with so much salt when it comes to our context, right? So, but understanding that these systems and structures exist to not like the internet as it is does not inherently exist to benefit the citizens, the people in Uganda. It exists to provide a platform for the powers that be to be able to access the information that they need to keep themselves as powerful as they would like to be. So the future of it is actually challenging the structures, transforming the way data is used, the way information is accessed on the internet, what information is paid for and what information is not paid for. Who are the people who hold the power of the internet? I think one of the biggest complaints has been with iPhone, the fact that over time they are making like older phones obsolete, right?
Yes,
they slow you down. They literally force you
to migrate,
to get a new phone,
yes.
which might not be necessary. So understanding that structure, that above all else, capitalism exists for profit. So if they can profiteer, they will find a way to profiteer over anything, like off anything, provided, like the most important thing is if they make their profit, they will sell anything about you, whether it's your data. Even when they have been compelled to provide information, you still have situations where institutions are being are being sued for selling data to third parties without the consent of the owners of the information. Yes.
Do you ever rejoin that?
No, I don't.
Okay, so you've talked structure. You've talked about challenging the systems that be, and people might ask, so how do I do that? And I know that you've also answered that. You've also answered that mildly, but can we further that conversation on how we are challenging systems? Should we then not buy iPhones, for example? What does the challenge look like? And for people who might be hearing this for the first time, what are some of the ways then you protect yourself against the system to make sure that there is a benefit on your side? Because again, it's a necessary evil. Yeah.
I don't have an answer for that question.
Okay.
Mostly because I think, one, I'm not, like my technical understanding of the internet and everything associated in order to be able to create the necessary responses to these things is very limited. I have an understanding of inequality and how it manifests in these different spaces, and I can see and speak to that. I think for me, the only thing I would encourage us is to grow in knowledge, especially those who have access to information, and to not grow in this knowledge so that we sit and make ourselves comfortable. Because just because I'm safe on the internet, if there are more people who are unsafe, then I'm interacting with the people who are also, who don't have this knowledge and could also present the harm towards me, right? But for me, it would be for us to, I would encourage people from our more social and even for the innovators within this space to understand system and structural inequality. That when you're creating an app and a venture capitalist from one of those countries in the global north is excited about your app, what are they truly excited about? Are they excited about your idea or what your idea can serve to fit within the bigger system of them getting what they want? Like, it's important for us to desire money. It's not important for us. It's important for people to have access to money because money provides access to other things. But it's also important for us to know when we are building a thing that is going to come and destroy us. So I would encourage the people in the field, the people who draft policies, the people who create the content that we use, the people who develop the platforms through which we access these services, to be able to think in a more structured way. And when we think in a more structured way, we're looking at the different categories of people and how those categories intersect to be able to and how we can understand how we use that intersectionality to build an internet that is responsive but also responsible for the dignity of people.
Maybe to rejoin on that, and that is where I'm struggling with, is a lot of people in choosing then what can we do, then self-censor.
Yes.
And they choose not to participate. They're like, I can't be on that internet.
But it's also a revolutionary act, right? To remove yourself can be a revolutionary act.
In one and itself is that one, you're excluding yourself from a community that is now for your good. But I think the argument then is how do we appeal to the capitalists to have a moral stance? to these things.
Can we laugh a little bit?
Because I was struggling when you said that. I was like, can the capitalists ever come to a place where they are moral in their ventures? I know it's a hard call because, you know, an ethical internet is something that we keep pushing for and advancing for, but something that is far-fetched, because I think those are then the arguments that we have with Facebook selling people's data, with different entities being called out, you know, for having people's information out there. But the exclusion, I worry more for the exclusion that then happens, you know, especially for key populations. Like, I can't participate in that. I'd rather remove myself for the protection of self. And, you know, then we go on with the lack of information, a lack of, you know, the knowledge that you need. How do I access services? How do I, you know, navigate these spaces that I have chosen to actually take myself out? And then also, I want to believe that there are then people that are using the internet to you know, benefit the everyday woman. I think about, you know, apps that have been created that are linked to women that are in the farm areas, that are in market areas, and how it is benefiting them, you know, to advance for market and be able to, you know, sell produce. And that is on a small scale, but it's the future. So if we have areas where you can leverage technology and the internet, then for a fact we then can start to imagine that we can have in the future, you know, access to healthcare that is pro. I don't want to say pro poor. Am I allowed to say pro poor in language? Pro poor, pro women, pro children, things that cater to the everyday person. I think that is, for us as Uganda, we don't want to, you know, pull on AI, on the Internet of Things, but pull to things that we can leverage, you know, to help us as get urgency and voice to issues that matter to us.
Yeah, and maybe, and yes, Maria.
No, I just, you know, sometimes I'm curious, and like, no, sometimes I'm thinking how. Sometimes I'm thinking how. Is the internet as important as we have been taught to think about it? Like, no, like, I completely get that. Of course, if someone needs something to be important, they will make it seem like it's a way English was made to seem like the only way to access the rest of the world and do everything like that. So, of course, now I guess we're at that point where there's almost a point of no return, right? But sometimes I'm thinking to myself, maybe the revolutionary act is to think of community differently. Maybe the revolutionary act is to
do fireside chats.
It's to do fireside chats. Because very often we want to hear about something from somewhere else without realizing that there are experiences within our communities that we have chosen to negate, but would rather hear a story of women suffering with menstrual menstruation related issues. We prefer a thread from a Nigerian woman, and yet there are women in Uganda who are sharing their experiences, but it's not valid enough.
Because it's not on the internet.
Yes, we think that when Mama Nachi says she's struggling with economics, like, her point is not as valid as when Maria Alesi does a thread somewhere, right? So maybe it's us thinking about that. And I might be in my delusionary mind, but for me sometimes I'm thinking that maybe it's about time the world did not accord as much importance to things as we actually think they are, or we've been told to think, because there's been intentional information to push us into thinking the future is internet, the future is artificial intelligence, the future is it really that? Like, for me, that's like a question I've been asking myself over time.
We're really being constructed. And maybe that one of the important questions to ask yourself is, when was the last time you took an internet break?
True.
But we will not ask that question here. But I'll bring this conversation down to our everyday usage of internet. And the average person uses the internet either to do emails, to catch up with friends and in-laws, social media in-laws on the various social media platforms. And Tricia mentioned something about self-censorship. I know someone who said, there's this group I want to leave, but I can't leave it.
Why?
And then there are these people who say, I can only leave the group at 2 a.m. But you see, you are not the You're not the administrator of this group. Why should you escape?
Yes.
And so there is a lot of censorship, but there's also a lot of fear, that has come with the use of internet. And yet in that same breath, there's a lot of abuse on the platforms that we are on, and there's a lot of removal of should I say, our beings. We cannot even participate. You're there, people abuse each other from morning to evening, and then you're wondering how to live. So coming back to the basics, all of us are on WhatsApp groups, all of us are on Facebook, or many of us are on Twitter. Yes. How do we make those spaces more feminist in nature? And maybe the first thing would be to leave the places which are not. But should you choose to stay because you have censored yourself, how do we then make some of these spaces safer for the communities that we have talked about at a more structural level?
Yes, I will always go back to internet is just an extension of our society as it is. Like only now we've been given more audacity and courage to say things because I'm not standing in front of Isabella. And yes, like if you want to fight, come to Chigowa, right?
Yes. I love that tagline.
Yes, so I think like the way we respond to violence in the everyday life. The truth is, if you're not responding to, first of all, if you don't even have people don't even know that this is violence. Like they just think we're existing over free speech, what. One, if you don't know what violence is, you will not even know how to respond to it. That's one. Number two, it's critical consciousness raising. It's a consistent asking people why. I'm going to make reference to a thread I saw this morning about a girl who her thread was really in line of, I used to be in the men are trash brigade, then I went to this church which I shall not name, and then my pastors and elders taught me about how showed me that marriage works and marriage is valid, and so about what there are good men out there, something really along those lines. Anyway, basically she wanted to tell us she was engaged, but she wanted to add the other parts of it. And for me, what was most offensive is the fact that she trivialized the matter of violence against women, because the birth of the discussion of men are trash comes from the discussion of intimate partner violence against women from South Africa. Like, we're not discussing heartbreak. Like, you cannot trivialize violence.
Or the nicety of...
No, like, you cannot trivialize your we left each other because we are not compatible, or someone said I can't do this anymore, and your heart is so pained because you felt like this person was your property that you should own, and blah 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 blah, to like trivializing that heartbreak and comparing it to the discussion on violence against women. So that person's inability to see that men are trash is a discussion around violence against women means that even in her everyday life, she will not see violence and call it out. So for that, we need to do consciousness raising, consciousness raising for the different groups of people, especially the people who imagine they are powerful, right? And then, and for me, I would encourage, like my encouragement to people is a beginning point of learning how to be consciously aware, even as feminists, right? Is to one, to read feminist literature. People have written good work. Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, Sylvia Tamale, like there's all these people who have written. And I would add to that list Paulo Freire, the one of pedagogy of the oppressed. It opens your mind to how you have internalized violence and think it's normal, right? How you've internalized your oppression and you don't see it every day, but it also informs us on how then we do the learning and unlearning. How do we teach? Yes, what does teaching look like in the liberation of the oppression of the oppressed, right? But also how the oppressor is also does not realize that in themselves they are oppressed, right? So for me, I would vouch for consciousness raising, because our problem now more than anything is the fact that we don't even know that violence is violence. Yes.
Okay, maybe just to add on what she's saying is, I've learned that within these spaces you can actually create spaces for yourselves. I mean, we are an evidence of an utopia that we created,
association
because yes Because out of the fatigue of these things, you can't fight everyone.
Yeah.
Of course, I can take on, but you can't fight everyone. So you need to create a little bit of spaces where you go back, rejuvenate, rethink what the purpose is for this internet before you actually self-censor yourself. But then also choose the conversations you're privy to. You can't fight everyone. So choose your battles. Choose spaces that are healthy for you. Mental health is something we keep saying, but choose spaces that are healthy for you. At any point, if you feel this place is toxic, you have the right to leave.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much, ladies. And I think as we close the show, one, there's been a lot of conversation around educating ourselves, especially around the internet, because the internet is not it's not our friend. It's a necessary evil. And so it's important that you're aware of the evil that you're dealing with, that there are benefits. We're not saying become awakened and abandon the internet. No, it's necessary. There are benefits that we accrue from the internet. But the only way we can benefit is if we understand the extractive nature of the internet. And even as we challenge it, you can challenge it on the very simple fronts of the platforms that you're part of, but there's also opportunity to challenge it at structural and system level. And at the end of the day, we do this not so that we can kill the internet, because we can't, but we do it so that we can have a more equitable, more dignified experience with the internet on an everyday basis. Otherwise, thank you very much. Enjoy the week. Please take time to rest. We have a public holiday on Friday. Take time to mourn, but also take time to rest. Thank you very much and have a peaceful weekend.